Jakarta Art Council. Actually, I'm in and still is in film committee. So many of my obligation currently are about movies. And in public culture, we also join Mizan Group to form a platform which is Madani Film Festival, Madani International Film Festival. So while actually, if you see my current chaotic room, I have a lot of new comic. Recently, I purchased this, one of the historical comics with, well, one of the things of being a comic critics or comic researcher in Indonesia, you have to pay yourself. So this is quite expensive, but rather cheap compared to the collector's item price, So I immediately went on to purchase this, and I haven't got the chance to, open it in my free time because not so many free time currently. And of course, I have to remember many things when Mr. Satria asked me about the topic or the themes about comic and identity. Wow, it's quite related into my to my 2010 through 2011 research in Japan and in Thailand about the globalization of manga subculture. The title of my journalistic research is about the globalization of manga subculture, but actually I came across a problem of identity, of course, in comics and in comic subculture. It is quite interesting to see the development of manga subculture that is very unique, and I came across the problem of visual identity also. So I will share my stories, my thinking about that. But if you want, I wrote about my experience in Japan the first month in Japan in this book. Quite a hard sell, I'm sorry. You still can find it in Tokopedia or something like that, in Gramedia. But in this book, I wrote my experience of Japanese subculture as many as I can during the first month. So I spent 10 months in Japan, mostly in Tokyo, but I visited also many cities and tried to grab the visual culture of manga in Japan and try to understand how come that very unique, and until 1990s, many people didn't think that the visual languages, visual story, visual narratives of manga from Japan could be translated well into other languages or other culture. And then in early 1990s, we could see the rise of otaku culture, the nerd, the Japanese visual culture nerd throughout the world. Firstly, from the success of Evangelion, Evangelion in MTV. But before that, during 80s, there is a seeds of those globalization. For example, the Gen Kaki Ayam, we know it in Indonesia, Gen Kaki Ayam, the translation of manga Gen, titled Gen, about the Hiroshima atom bomb, the tragedy, translated into America, and it began the seeds of fascination toward Japanese visual culture. And there is an interplay of identity problem in that process of globalization of manga subculture that I found very interesting and very relevant to my problem in Indonesia regarding the dominance of Indonesian manga readers that dominated in the Indonesian. How come we have the new generation of comic reader, comic market that really doesn't accept the traditional Indonesian comic language, visual language, and grown with the reference of Japanese visual language. So if you know Mr. Satria, in our generation we have Pak Tony Sidin.
Pak Tino Sidin
Shape our visual references and visual languages. Yeah, we draw animals, person, figurative form, like Tino Sidin taught us in our national television. At that time, the only station we have to watch, because of the Suharto regime limited the development of broadcasting industry and so on. So we have the reference of that, of Tino Sidin. And then I found my niece, my younger friends couldn't make the same kind of visual language when they express themselves visually. So I think it's kind of interesting to see that that phenomenon. So could I share my slide, or
you want to do that by yourself, or Elvira can help you? If it's up to you.
Yeah, but probably I would like to try myself.
Okay.
Because in the middle, I think I would like to share other things also.
Yeah.
Okay, so I forgot. Good afternoon, all. Okay, could I share it now? Okay, right. Okay, so my relation with comics probably began since my childhood, and I think that I interacted with comics is in the same way like I interacted with books, stories, prose stories, poems, and so on. There was not any hierarchy in my mind between comics and literature. For me, all of those reading for me is also a literature in itself. So I have no problem in appreciating comics, and I have a fascination, same kind of fascination with words when I read poems and so on. I have a fascination to observe all the visual elements in comics and how come they could tell a story and give impact to myself when I read the comics since my childhood. So of course I'm not immediately understood the magic of the comics, how it operates, but of course after my fascination as a kid, in my childhood, in my adolescence, I continue to read comics with more developed ideas about how it could be read. So I usually it's because one of the factor, I think that because a very limited money for me to consume comics. So I have to read same comics, probably 10, 20 comics over and over and over again. So I grew my my appreciation into details of the comics that I read over and over. Of course, beside the comic that my mom or my dad bought me, or I bought it with my allowances, I also consume comic that belong to my friends and my siblings, and other source. Not so many comics from library, I think, especially from school library, because comics, of course, is something that was not considered as a good reading that belong to the library. Of course, I have to find other sources. For instances, I have to visit the local comic book rentals. Usually during Ramadan. Yeah, when I'm waiting for the Maghrib time, you know, I usually watch wuxia or kung fu movies, or searching for the local rental comic book rental, and you know, immerse myself with all the fantasy world of comics, usually from Indonesia, yeah, silat and wayang. Usually in my childhood, it's a superhero and silat comic, but I found wayang comic also in my uncle houses. Usually, wayang comic is a vehicle for parents to you know to share the values, yeah, the old values of what is good, what is bad, and so on, the traditional values through the myth of Mahabharata and Ramayana in comics, in modern comics. So it's many parents consider it as an effective way to, you know, to socialize those traditional values to their children. So yeah, this is Indonesia, the first Indonesian superhero. Probably you already know that. This is Sri Asih, created by R.A. Kosasih in 1954. I like this kind of panels, you know, the interplay between the modern modern car and the superhero wearing the traditional batik kebaya, you know, and tell a story, quite modern story about spies and so on, gangsters and so on. So this is the first superhero in Indonesia. This is a female superhero, Sri Asih, created in 1954. Also, at that time, John Law created Putri Bintang. So this is in itself a very interesting aspect of Indonesian comics, modern comics, because the first superhero is a female superhero, and we could see a lot of interesting things with the development of Indonesian superhero comics. But I wouldn't focus on that today. I would try to talk about stereotype, representation, globalization, and visual identity in comic regarding the problem of comics and identity. So yeah, the most important question in comics is, why do you think Superman wears his bright red underpants outside? This is a very important question. I would like to begin our conversation with this important question. Okay, it's because I would like to say that this is a basic practice in using stereotype as a creative tool. So in the first decade of modern comics in America, they use a lot of stereotype as a creative tool to answer the problem of how the comic artist with a very limited skill of drawing could draw the same characters panel after panels, and we as the reader could see the similarities. So they rely on the stereotypical things. For example, how they create the characters of people of color, for example. And of course, the hero always white. Yeah, white. And the costume is part of that method, yeah, part of the creative tool. You could always draw a character without actually getting into details. So you could immediately see the similarities of the character and create a relation between panels and create and form a story in our head. That this is a continuation of the previous panels. So stereotype is a kind of a creative tool at that time. During 30s, Superman, of course, 30s, but actually way before that. I think it's from, in America at least, we could see that in the creation of a Yellow Kid, yeah, very, very stereotypical, right? This is a very interesting phenomena because Yellow Kid actually contribute to the development of graphic design history in America because of the first use of watercolor technique to the comics, and the creators insisted in publishing the comic as it is with all the colors. So it became a breakthrough in the comic print technology at that time to publish the Yellow Kid comics with all the colors and all the design, the graphic design as intended by the artist. But Yellow Kid comics is very, upon reading it now, very problematic, right? Because a very stereotypical physics of the character, it's from China, so it has a yellow skin, a very yellow skin actually, and large teeth, middle teeth, and a very, very unique eyes, yeah, as you can see as all this. But back to the Superman. So beside the Action Comics number one, published in June 1938, you can see a picture of Jules Léotard, one of the circus player, aerial circus player that that was famous during 1850s. Yeah, Julius Léotard. He died in 1880s probably, yeah, from pandemic, yeah, I think. So this is one of the inspiration for Joe Siegel and Joe Shuster and Jerry Siegel to create Superman with all the bright colors. The inspiration is from the circus. The other inspiration was from the Hercules character in the circus that they saw as a kid, with all the the underpants, the bright underpants, and the strong pose, usually lifting something heavy, and that's it. That's one of the main reason why Superman wears his bright red underpants outside. But we can see that this is part of the creative tools, and we can later that in comics, this is some of the comics that created before or around the time of Superman that use stereotype as a creative tools, be that for the narrative flow, narrative necessities at that time for the artist to tell the story of the white savior adventurer saving the world, in particular in all other world from all the Oriental world or the Africa continent and so on, in relation to the colonial thinking at that time. Of course, it is still the time for the colonial. For example, this is Tintin or Tang Tang. It's from Belgium, and as we know, in 1950s, probably until 1953, we can still see human zoo in Belgium, containing all the as they say, primitive culture from Africa for their colonial state that they have power to govern. Yeah. So you can see this from Tintin in Congo, yeah, Tintin in Congo. Actually, in 2000, I forget the year, yeah, 2013 or something like that. There was a court, international court, which want to decide whether Tintin is a racist comic or not. I didn't find the result of that court, but it was an interesting story, yeah, at that time, yeah. And of course, in the middle, you can see American comics. Well, of course, also Tarzan American comic, yeah. But on the first panel in the second row, you can see a panel from Terry and the Pirates. You can see a very, very, stereotypical, very, very racist picture or characterization of Chinese character. That actually one of the good guy in that comic. It was very popular, yeah, the comic Terry and the Pirates by Milton Caniff. And also we have The Spirit from Will Eisner, one of the father of American comics, who created so many visual grammar and visual languages for American comics. We can see the character named Ebony, yeah, as a sidekick of the Spirit. And this is from 1947, I think, these panels. And we can see this problematic characterization of the Ebony character, yeah, in The Spirit. And we can see Tarzan by Vern Hogarth. At that time, many people compare Vern Hogarth to as the Michelangelo of comics, yeah, at that time, because of the inspiration and the style that draw so much from the Michelangelo influence. And we can see still this kind of stereotype as a creative tool for him to get the comic, get the narrative of the comic clear for the reader at that time, for the American reader at the time. You can see the very stereotypical and problematic, yeah. Now, if we can see this now, yeah, very problematic stereotypical characterization, visual characterization of people from other than white race, yeah, Caucasian race. So we can see Tarzan built a very idealistic, body, and embedded in the reader mind, yeah, as an idealization of man, and all his enemies, yeah, with a very stereotypical characterization. So during that time, it is a very not only common but sensible way for American cartoonists to use stereotype as a creative tools. One of the best example of the use of the heavy use of stereotypical characterization of enemy rogue galleries in this example is Dick Tracy. Yeah, was Dick Tracy first published in 1931. The rogue gallery, the enemy always drawn in the very grotesque and extreme deformed faces and bodies. Yeah, this is one of the most popular villain, flat top, shaky, prune face, Mrs. Prune Face. So the basic stereotype used as a creative tools in mainstream American comics, or probably European also at the time, is that the enemy, the villain, the evil is always grotesque, always monstrous. Yeah, is a monster with a grotesque faces and bodies is a very common tools for demonization of other. Yeah, while we portray other as an enemy or something that very menacing, we also used to portray them as a monster. It's a very common tools, creative tools in in Western popular narratives since Middle Ages, yeah, probably, yeah. We have to read more, a lot more about that. I think from Middle Ages we can see that kind of practices in Western. But at one point, it seems that realism is the disruptive method for the established stereotyping method of cartooning in American comics. So what I want to say is this, that in 1970, Green Lantern number 71, the creators at that time, which is Dennis O'Neil as a writer and Neil Adams as an artist, as the artist, they created storylines that try to tell the realist story of American streets, the gritty realist story of the problem in the American street. So basically, after this edition, the pair, Green Lantern and Green Arrow, they have a road trip, to understand more about the social problem of America. And these particular panels are the first revelation for Green Lantern to begin that journey. This is a dialogue about how come Green Lantern, of course, it kind of metafiction in itself. Yeah, we can read it as a metafiction. It's a comment of the previous stories of American superhero comics that could always busy dealing with the cosmological problem in other galaxies while forgetting the real problem in the street of America. I've been reading about you, how you work for the blue skins and how on a planet someplace you help out the orange skins. And you done considerable for the purple skins. Only their skins you never bothered with, the black skins. I want to know how come. Answer me that, Mr. Green Lantern. So with the slump body, as pictured by Neil Adams, he said meekly, I can't. He couldn't answer that question, that hard question. So the Green Lantern and the Green Arrow after that began the journey of self-realization, probably inspired by the movies like, I forget Satria, Dennis Hooper, to fight, to search for American dream or American reality in the road. Yeah? I forget the title. Yeah, probably it comes later. Yeah. So this is the beginning of the quite long storyline of the reality of. So this is a beginning also for American superhero comic, or should I say American mainstream comics, to realize the potential of comics to tell the realist story. The realism, it seems like a way to disrupt all other practice of stereotyping in comics as a common practice, as a normal practice at that time. We can see that before that, actually, in the more popular comics in America at that time, which is Peanuts, we can see also the introduction of the first black characters in Peanuts world, which is Franklin. this is the first panel when Franklin give help to Charlie Brown, the main character, on the beach, on one beach. You know, this quite historical, not only because of the first appearance of Franklin, and later on, this is a series of the beach storyline, where Franklin always appear in the panels as an introduction, a deliberate introduction from Schulz, the comic artist, to the mainstream reader of American comic strip on the black character, which is Franklin, and later on the families. And in later comics, the skin is then not it became lighter. It became lighter not because of the color, but it's because for the practicality of minimizing the crosshatch, yeah, to draw the American black kid in the strip. But behind these panels, actually there is a struggle of American civil movement and the effect. Yeah, this is this panel began with the letter from I forget the name. It's a Jewish teacher in America that was very concerned over the aftermath of the murder of Martin Luther King. So she asked Schulz if you could include black characters in the comics, in the most popular comics in America, she said, so you can have a conversation and normalization of the appearance of the black character in the mainstream comics in America. So this is a very interesting exchange. So after many exchanges and a fierce, opposition from the United Feature Syndicate leader at that time, Charles Schulz stubbornly began the drawing and include the Franklin character in his comics. So yeah, there are so many stories still about the representation of black people in American comics. And we can see also in 1970, the first anthology, comic anthology published independently, that was comprised all women underground comics artists, edited by Trina Robbins. She is my hero, and I'm very happy because of the pandemic. I could visit her virtually. Well, actually not visit her. Actually, one of the discussion that I saw, wow, they got Trina Robbins, and because of the Zoom technology, I can attend to the discussion, and for the first time, I hear her talking live. She's one of my hero. And after the anthology, It Ain't Me Babe, you can see all the female character that previously known as a character in American American comics, basically. Yeah, Olive. You can see Olive, who we always saw as a partner or a love object of Popeye, the Sailor Man. We can see Mary Marvel, Wonder Woman, of course, Sheena, and this is actually translated in Indonesia. I forget, sorry. The little one. Okay. So they have angry faces, and they should be, because the beginning of this anthology is the awareness that in underground comics, while it was a very liberating scene for comic artists to express their opposition for the state and mainstream culture, they began the counterculture movement in comics with the underground comics scene in San Francisco, in Seattle, and so on. In New York also, with one of the most prominent creator is Robert Crumb. They felt that even in the underground comic scene, the women always portrayed as a sexual object. Yeah, they still have a discrimination and so on within the freedom movement in America. So they felt that they should have their own platform. So voila, It Ain't Me Babe, Women's Liberation, with all those angry faces that now I always, always applaud because they should be angry, with all the structural discrimination and so on in America and in other part of the world. So they continue the anthology from 1972 to 1992, with the anthology of women's comics. And we have all the big names after that: Aline Kominsky Crumb, Diane Numin, Carol Leigh, Penny Van Horn, etc. As alumni from this great comic anthology in America. And we can see also the representation of the sexual orientation identity, based identity, sexual orientation based identity. For example, this is the first gay superhero marriage. Superhero gay marriage. How should I say it? Superhero gay marriage. Gay superhero marriage.
Confusing, I know.
Gay wedding, wedding. Actually, before that, 20 years before this happened, the character, which is Canadian superhero North Star, and the partner is not a superhero or not a mutant. He's a regular guy like us, like us. It feels like a reality. Actually, openly gay. Written as an openly gay superhero in Alpha Flight and Uncanny X-Men series in 1992. 1991, around that time. And after that, there were so many characters that also openly gay in American comics, but usually in the section of comics for adult or adult comics or containing adult material and so on. So sometimes I felt that all those gay characters, gay superhero characters, like for example Midnighter and his partner, an archetype of Superman and Batman. So if you wonder what if Batman and Superman a gay couple, you can see that in Authority Comics. That's also a gay, openly gay superhero. And I thought that most of the time it's for the edginess of the comic. It's not really about representing the groups, the minority groups, but it's more about giving the age of the comics, of the story, so you can have the added value of reading the cool comics at that time. Well, at least that's a problem that I think about during that time with the representation of gay superheroes in American comics. We could discuss about this later, but this is a very openly open statement, openly gay celebration from Marvel Comics at that time in 2012. And I have to share the story of Gebora. I was involved in this project. It is a project that tried to respond the bloody ethnic conflicts in Ambon, Pontianak, and Poso during 2004 to 2006. Yeah, this is an initiative from an Indonesian branch of international NGO, Common Ground Indonesia, in early 2000s. 12 volumes of American comics format. You can see the format in physically in the size of the comics, and also with the inclusion of color and so on, and 32-page format each volume. And American influence art. Well, actually, it's not all American because of the artists at that time during we work of this project. I involved in probably in the early preparation and the 6th number of the all 12 numbers of the Gebora comic series. But I remember the artist also. I have to say this is quite sad to see this picture today and to to share the story about it, because one of the early artists was Balkis. Yeah, her name is Balkis, and she already died several years ago, probably 2 years ago, yeah, from the horrific fire accident with her husband in Pasar Minggu. So it's quite sad. And one other artist, I think, also already died, involved and already died several years ago. So young, yeah, and yet they gone, already gone. So it's quite sad. And also I would like to share the story behind this Gebora project. So the idea is quite simple. With all the bloody conflict and all the impact of the conflict psychologically, the trauma that happened to the children, the Common Ground tried to use popular culture medium such as comic and radio play to tell a story about diversity and how we could live ideally with each other with all of the differences. So for a comic, we create a story of the Kampung football team that anggotanya apa? The member of the football team were the representation of the conflicting ethnics at that time. So there was a representation of Madura ethnicity, ethnic kid, Kalimantan, Ambon, yeah, and also the religious representation, yeah, Islam and Christian, because of the Poso conflict is a religious conflict at the time. And also we include the fluid gender character in the story of Kampung football team. During the production, Common Ground Indonesia also initiated a comic workshop and discussions in those areas of conflict. For example, I went with the team of comic artists and comic producer at that time to Poso. Well, actually to Tentena area. It's quite far from Poso actually, but those two at that time still have a tension, yeah, that could erupt every time. And at that time, it's the year after the peace pact at that place, but there are so many because I still have to travel with the car, and we have to curtain our windows, yeah, and there was a sniper and so on during the travel between Poso and it's very segregated at that time. we met with a person that usually he's from Islamic side of the conflict. Usually travel to Tentena Lake and woods to observe the habitat, the ecological habitat at that time, because he said that it is a very rich lab, biological lab for the researcher, because of the snakes, yeah, the ecology for snakes and the orchid, yeah, black orchid at that time. So he couldn't travel to Tentena anymore because of the conflict. So quite segregated, although at that time is a peaceful time, but still many tension. And during my and also the Common Ground workshop at Poso collaborated with the former militia from both religious side. So we have at that time nights after nights with a very happy conversation, lot of laughs, yeah, and exchanges between all the former enemies at that time. And I would like to share another thing, that after I went back to my home in Jakarta, the comic teams continue to present the workshop of creating comics for the local kids at that time. And it was in Tentena. And after 2 weeks, probably, they still doing that. And during one time, they have a class, and they have a wall, and behind those walls, the bomb exploded at the time. The bomb exploded, and again the tension erupted. So those are the comic artists, Islamic. Yeah, they are Islam, so they have to hide in the church with the help of the former militia from Christian militia at that time. So it's not easy to have this kind of representation actually in Guebora comics. We have those behind the scenes stories that that show us that in Indonesia actually, and we tend to forget that now during our social media frenzy activities, yeah, clicking that, clicking this, you know, click monkeying the hoax and so on about the differences and the conflict and so on. We tend to forget that once we have a very bloody ethnic conflict and religious conflict, and it's in 2000s, not so far ago, yeah, not so long time ago. It's quite near with our current situation. So and we try to use everything we could within our reach to gain the understanding, the common understanding that we are live in a diverse world and we have to live with that. But I don't know. Probably there are more development in this kind of representation in Indonesia. But I think we need to address it more seriously sometimes, because after that there are I'm also involved a little bit in, you know, conversation about representing the Islamic values because of the problem of Ahmadiyah and the Shia and so on. There are so many problems in representing many things, the diverse things in Indonesia in popular culture media such as comics. So I think there is an unfinished business, yeah, for me about this kind of representation, yeah, in comic. But representation relate with the problem of identity. And what is identity? A sense of self, a sense of belonging to certain group. I remember reading once the essay from C.S. Lewis that kind of a commencement speech. Yeah, one day he said, one of you will become a very Satria bajingan tuh apa ya? Asshole.
Bastard.
Bastard, yeah.
Bastard, yeah.
One of you will be a bastard, not because you born to be a bastard, but because of two things: the apa ya, hasrat besar tuh, the desire to be within a group, or the horror to be outside the group. So it is a very strong form of identity, right? A sense of belonging to a certain group. And probably that is one of the roots of all evil today regarding the problem of identity or identity-based conflict, yeah. So 21st century construct of identity, we know already this truism, right? Identity is not fixed. Yeah. Identity is fluid, of course. It is influenced by personal choices and by society. Yes, that's why it's so complex, yeah, the problem of identity. And we either try to shake it out of our system. No, I don't have problem with identity or kind of identity. I'm very fluid. Or we actually, have a fascism attitude toward it, hold on too tight with the our attribute of identity. Identity consists of attributes which are shared, like race, ethnicity, gender, religion, etc. It is also consists of how a person sees the world. This is interesting, actually. That is why our view of the world always give a sense of a certain kind of, sense of self, yeah, for oneself. Yeah. You are what you eat. I think you are what you tweet, yeah. Now, yeah. Feuerbach said that you are what you eat. Yeah, your identity defined by what you eat. But nowadays, probably you are what you tweet. And in your tweet, you actually give away your point of view of the world, how this world works, how the person sees the world. And that's become our form of identity today, a very strong form of identity. And of course, identity have a personal aspect and a group aspect. Yeah, in group aspect, we have a nationalistic identity. Is very classic and still used. Yeah, the meme in Indonesia, very popular meme. Yeah, kepak sayap Garuda. Please translate that. Kepak sayap Garuda. The meme about how politicians could always have annoying habit to appropriate the achievement of Indonesian people, the individual achievement of Indonesian people abroad or in Indonesia. When someone achieves something so very great, yeah, so great, there will be a poster from a politician said that this is our achievement. This is our achievement, and he or his or her face is bigger than the actual person who achieved that. That kind of annoying phenomenon. Nationalistic identity is still there, is still with us. Religious identity, of course, it's a big problem, probably, or a big opportunity to create bridges. I don't know. But nowadays, it seems like that religious identity creating more problem than not. I could be wrong, of course. It's based on my experience, my limited experience. Ethnic identity, sexual identity, sexual orientation, and so on. And what I would call postmodern tribalistic identity. For example, nowadays, we have a very strong sense of identity within the group of a very small area. Yeah, for example, cosplayer. When I first got home in Jakarta, yeah, and first meet with the cosplay group, one cosplay group, and I said that, oh yeah, yesterday I met with with a cosplayer too. Oh yeah, so they interrogated me. Which one of those cosplayer? Which city is from? And so on and so on. Is it Japanese or is it whatever? So I haven't got that experience in Japan actually. I only got that experience in Jakarta, you know. So it's like a tribes, yeah, a postmodern tribe. I said this not because of the fancy term, yeah, postmodern. It's because I first have this notion when I read about it in Akbar S. Ahmed book, yeah, Islamic Postmodernism. He said that he wrote that nowadays we tend to create our sense of group, a strong sense of group within a tribe of consumption. Yeah, yeah. For example, K-pop or J-pop. Yeah, I listen to both, but apparently it's a wrong way to listening and consuming K-pop or J-pop. If you a J-pop person, you could not listen to K-pop. At least that's the situation in 2011 or 12. Yeah, I don't know about the current situation, but we can see ARMY. I respect ARMY very much. Yeah, BTS ARMY, because they have the actual power to have a social movement, and they have a strong and good campaign of political issues or environmental issues. Yeah, they actually do something with their collectivities. Yeah, but how about other K-pop tribes, J-pop tribes, American tribes, between the tribes of gun control and gun freedom? It's very tribalistic, and you could form the sense of identity, a strong sense of identity with those tribalistic group. Yeah. So that is the current identity problem of identity in that we face today. So I would like to add some another variable. I would like to add globalization as a variable of identity. It was developed in Japan with my journalistic research, a 10-month experience in Japan, and continued in 2017 for 6 days only to update my finding at that time. So I think that at the purest sense and its simplest notion, global culture, I think it's just what everybody does or could do regardless the geography. The current form of global culture has international economic forces as a major force behind it. Sure, you have a structural situation here, but when all said and done, it's about people consuming fast food, popular movies and music, branded clothes, etc., with all of its pros and cons. Probably it's a globalization in a common sense definition for me. Yeah, that it is a very real situation, and also a variable of our form of identity today. So what is identity in regard of globalization? It's only a tweak, I think, of that situation. A tweak resulted by the unique history, unique geographical condition, and the language of every country or every ethnicities and every. So basically, I talk about globality as a variable of identity in the form of in the relation of the localities. Yeah, I think I define localities as spatialities. It's not geographical localities. It's spatial. So you actually just have to set boundaries. You can set the boundaries to meters, 4 meters per square, and that's your locality, and everything that happen is a localities, and you can expand it into a cities, boundaries of cities, and what happened inside of those localities, spatialities, is all of the the cultural localities that I talk about in regard of dialectics with the globalization and forming our sense of identities. So what is visual identity? This is also a problem that I encounter in my research in Japan. You can see the big eyes, and in America, until early 1990s, there are so many popular myths about how Japanese manga contain the characters with big eyes as a form of dreaming to become Western people with all the wide eyes open. Well, actually, in reality, in fact, this is from Osamu Tezuka, one of he is a godfather of manga, one of the early pioneer of modern Japanese manga, Japanese comics. You can see Shintaka Rajima is an adaptation of Robert Louis Stevenson Treasure Island, and also you can see Astro Boy. Yeah, Astro Boy. You can see the big eyes. Actually, it's because Osamu Tezuka influenced by Disney animation. So all the big wide eyes of in his comics and animation and anime is actually style borrowed from the Disney animation and comics at that time. So it's not really about dreaming to become a wide open eye Westerners. It's not really about that. So the myth itself, at one point, also adopted in one article from The Economist, was a part of the Oriental the modern Oriental view toward Japanese pop culture. So this is one of the problem also. And so I continue my thinking about is it such thing? Is it real for me to explore about the problem of visual identity? Because I think part of the interesting part of the interesting aspect of Japanese comic is its visual languages and the distinct style of. We can immediately say that this is Japanese, right? So I try to make an assessment about what is a visual elements in comic tradition between Japanese manga, European comic, and American comic. So I would like to share my table. Okay. How many more times do I get? Mr. Satria?
Well, 2 minutes ago is 10 minutes, so now 8 minutes.
Wow. Okay. So, yeah, I will speed up the presentation. Okay. No. How come I couldn't share this? Is it? Do you see that?
Yes, I see that. Yeah.
The table, yeah. So I try to assess this element of visual as an effort to understand the visual identity of these three main domains of comic industry in the world: Japan, Europe, and America. What I mean about Europe is Western Europe, and you see in lines and shape, in Japan, we have a visual tradition from ancient Chinese civilization, and aesthetic evolved in context of its heavy use of brush and ink and some kind of watercolors for their fragile papers. While in European comics, we have a visual tradition since Renaissance, logical within a well-established discipline of art in art school and other art institutions. And in America, we have a visual tradition from media tradition, Yellow Kid and so on. Yeah, Benjamin Franklin doing cartoons during 18th century, yeah, probably, yeah. And Pulp Fiction, and I would I would say that it's semi logical and mostly autodidact. And we have an element of figurative shape that I characterize as impressionism in Japanese comic, yeah, and lyrical. You know, the lyrical part is, I think, what I would call poetry of shape, poetry of space, and poetry of movement in relation to the poetry of time that expressed visually in Japanese manga. And non-mimetic, yeah, two-dimension, flat, non-realism, and it always had an artistic idealization. While in European comic, we have a tradition of figurative shape that influenced by physiognomy. You know, the physiognomy is the notion that you can read the qualitative character of a person by its shape. Yeah, what is the characters, the psychological character of the fat woman, for example. That is the traditional knowledge, yeah, of the art of cartooning or making caricature in Europe. Yeah, so basically mimetic with a kind of a certain of realism or make believe and a logical idealization. While in America you have a stereotype, mimetic also, realism also, and fantastic idealization, not logical idealization. So in colors, in Japanese comic, you have a color palette that originated from nature and the colors of Japanese flowers, food, etc. The contrast but calm colors of Japanese nature, as we could see in many of the traditional drawing or painting in Japan, yeah, especially after 19th century. And in European, the tradition of color originated from fine art tradition with references to their fine art schools and periods. Also draw from the nature, actually, the European nature. And in America, we have the tradition of colors originated from the printed media tradition, with the birth of strip comics Yellow Kid as the first colorful printed comics in the US. Continued in Pulp Fiction tradition with its contrast and aggressive colors. And the space, yeah, the visualization of space in Japanese comics influenced by the philosophy of Kukan Supesu. Empty spaces are not empty. And the principle of Ma, space equals time. The image of space is signifying the flow of time. While in European comics, we have the clear line tradition from Harje Tintin series, which is also known as a democratic approach to draw spaces in comics. Everything in the room must be drawn equally clear. And in the American comic, we have space as the backdrop of a story. The space inside a panel is a support for text and an illustration. So basically the text dominate the panel in American comics usually. Nowadays, of course, there are cultural exchanges between styles and and visual grammar between American comics, Japanese comics, and European comics, Italian comics, Asian comics, and so on. So we have a hybrid development of this tradition of space visualization in comics. I should share this file, yeah, later on. So I have still so many, quite a lot of things to say, but I think I would ask more time a little bit, Mr. Satria, just to share a speed up version of what I would like to discuss actually. And that is, probably this, yeah. Okay. So, okay. So we have this historical journey of the development of Indonesian comics from the colonial times in 20s, 30s, 40s. This is from Saseo Ono, very important figures in the history of Indonesian art, especially during the Japanese occupation. And here is one of his influence in comic strip, yeah, in Indonesia. He provide canvases and paints, yeah, for Indonesian contemporary artists at that time, yeah, for Sujoyono, and for literature, also for movie production at that time. It's very, very important figure, Saseo Ono. And here it is his comic strip during 1945, yeah, Papaya Pichan, Indonesian character created by Saseo Ono. And this is put on, but I would like to take you to the short trip with wayang comic, because Seno Gumilar Aji Dharma in his book Ngobrolin Komik, his newest book, the anthology of articles and essays about comics, he said that wayang comic is the field of ideological and cultural competition and dialectics, according to Seno Gumilar Aji Dharma. Yeah. We can see the first comic according to Mr. Iwan Gunawan. This is from Iwan Gunawan collection. We can see the development of style, or should I say the dialectics of style, yeah, throughout the years between 50s, 60s, and 70s and 80s. And we can see also the competition, the ideological competition, as written by Seno Gumilar Aji Dharma, between the wayang comic from the puppet shadow puppet tradition, like this one, and the theater and dance performance performance art, like this one, yeah? Wayang Wong, wayang orang, like this one. And it continue until today with the publication of the wayang comic from created by Sujiwo Tejo. And of course, we can see this current development with the dialogue between manga style and the wayang mythology in Garudayana by Is Yuniarto. So yeah, that's it. I share many phenomenon and problem. I would like to discuss more, not only in this class, but also in other platform. Yeah. So that's it from me, Mr. Satria. Thank you.
Thank you, Mas Imad. It's very wonderful journey. This is the first time I know the first female superhero, Indonesian superhero here, Sri Asih.
Yeah,
I didn't know that. It's interesting. Anyone who has a question, please drop in the chat box, or you can raise your hand, ask the question, and also don't worry about the language. You can ask in Indonesia or in English. It's up to you. We will help you here. We do have some international students here. We have Jason from Philippines, And I do have my colleagues here from UK now attend here, Kandi Anuniswito. She's the one who doing research on comic Asterix the first time in our department, Mas Hikmat.
Wow, I would like to read it.
She makes a breakthrough to the field of research. I think she's doing research on Asterix and Obelix about anarchism. Yes, about anarchism.
Wow, we should do a discussion about that.
Anyone? I have a question here.
Yeah, actually, I have a question from Avianti Arman.
Okay.
Fifi, thank you, Fifi. Somewhere at some point there are cancel culture in the comic as well, right? Yeah, actually. And nowadays we have a new form of cancel culture, which is we cancel each other. Yeah, you know, we cancel each other. Yeah, in American comics, of course. Yeah, for example, the case of Robert Crumb. Initially, Robert Crumb is a very venerated artist, yeah, and a pioneer in underground comics, in counterculture, and now live in French. But in America, last year or 2 years ago, I read about the movement in a certain circle of American popular art communities in galleries and so on, to cancel Robert Crumb because of the problematic comics he created about women, yeah, about women. Because he's a firm believer of total freedom, and there should be no limitation on how we express ourselves through comics. So all of his dirty dreams of women, he created into comics also. So his comics considered as a misogynist comic. So now a certain circle campaign about canceling this artist. We don't need Robert Crumb to build our more purist story of art, popular art. Yeah, basically that's one of the campaign said. Yeah, so yeah. And how about in Indonesia? Yeah, probably I don't know if it's actually a we can say as a cancel part of a cancel culture, but we can see that many of the religious youth movement within the secular educational institution, like sekolah tinggi ya, SMA gitu ya, university, secular university, create within their limited close community comics appropriating from the appropriation of, for example, Doraemon comics, to campaign their what should I say, not fundamentalist, yeah, probably conservative view or fundamentalist view of the world. Yeah, it's funny enough to read Doraemon comics asking the reader to not forget for sholat, but to see Doraemon, canceling the lifestyle of their friend, yeah, their creator. I could not say creator, yeah, the maker, yeah, the maker of the comics. For example, the romantic relationship, ya, pacaran, ya, canceling the pacaran lifestyle very harshly, with the Doraemon mouth. It's quite, weird to say the least.
We do have that kind of comic?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Actually, I was informed by one of the younger researcher, yeah, several years ago, probably 3 or 4 years ago. I forget where I put the file. It should be fun, yeah, to show it to you. But yeah, we can see that now. I don't know the current trend, yeah, the current trend, but we have that. When? I don't know exactly. Probably when the identity politics became such a strong phenomenon, yeah. Probably 2012. Yeah, and 2014. Yeah,
Yeah.
very big at that time.
Political issues, yeah. Okay, Jason, we will share the file to our class group later on. I will ask Mas Hikmat to send it to me, and I will share it to our class for Jason. And also, I have one question, Mas Hikmat. Yeah, indeed, you mentioned about the wayang comic. Do you think that's the only particular identity of Indonesian comic? Do we have, because wayang is not really exclusively on Indonesian identity, isn't it? Wayang is kind of Asian culture.
Yeah.
But do we have Indonesian identity on comics?
Not really identity, but the particular genre that uniquely Indonesian, probably beside wayang comic, is silat comic. Comic silat. Silat is a form of bela diri.
Martial art.
Martial art, form of martial arts, but it is different from wuxia, or kung fu comics or kung fu stories is different. Although in the early years of Indonesian modern comic industry, so many comic artists draw the influence from wuxia and also from samurai movies. Yeah, for example, we can see Shibuta dari Gohantu, ya, a blind swordsman from Ghost Cave.
Ghost Cave.
Such a weird translation. Such a weird name when it's translated, right? Okay, from the Ghost Cave, yeah. Shibuta dari Gohantu is actually influenced by Zatoichi. Yeah, the blind swordsman, blind samurai from Japanese comics. And usually at that time, movies influence so much comic artists. Also, the interaction with the Chinese visual artists at that time, illustrators. For example, we have Otto Swastika. Yeah,
Otto Swastika.
Actually, he made comics also.
Oh.
Yeah. It's in a Chinese word, yeah. Forget. The series is Cheng Tang. I remember Cheng Tang. So in 50s, yeah, in Kenpo, if I remember correctly, he created a series of quite masterful comics, yeah, about Chinese history.
Okay.
So it's very important comics because it's influenced the later generation of comic artists such as Ganesh Teja and so on. We have here actually Koko Henry. He knows a lot more about that time, yeah, in Indonesian comic history than me. So he probably automatically remember who I'm talking about. Yeah. Later on, you could have discussion with Koko Henry. He wrote about Sergam Medan and so on. So quite many books about the Indonesian comics at that period of time.
Thank you, Mas Henry, for coming to this class.
Yeah.
We do have a question from Dina Listirini. What do you think about Disney comic, Mas Hikmat? Her master thesis in Indonesia was about representation about aliens and
wow, so specific. Yeah. Cool. Yeah, I just read your question. Okay, wow. The alien and UFO part is very interesting, and I would love to discuss it more, yeah, with you. You can ask my number from Mr. Satria, and we could talk about that. But I think Disney comics in Indonesia quite influential also, but not really as influential as Disney comics to the Japanese comics, yeah. Because the influence of Disney comics and cartoons, yeah, animation, felt by our generation of comics readers and artists throughout from 60s, late 60s and 70s, yeah, I think, yeah, and especially 80s, yeah. So after that, we have European influence also from Tintin and those Indira's publication, yeah, comics from Europe, translated by Indonesian from French, Belgium, and Dutch, yeah. So it was a very tight competition, yeah. Also with American comics. What I say about American comics is like superhero comics, yeah. So we can see the influence in the 70s and 80s children comics in Indonesia. But immediately in late 80s and especially early 90s, we can see the influence of Japanese manga, and it is more influential until today than other influence from America or Europe, yeah, for today's generation of artists. For example, you know, Doraemon, female comic, female Japanese comic, yeah, comics for girls, yeah. I forget a lot nowadays. Yeah, okay. So nowadays, Disney comics is not quite influential to our current generation of artists in Indonesia. Yeah, I think you could probably see the influence in the 80s, yeah, 80s children comics.
Now we do have a lot of, I think, manga style comics in
Yes, yes, even in religious comics, right?
Yeah, I see that. My daughter is the big fan of Miko. That's why I know that.
Yeah. And you have so many diverse option actually in terms of Japanese comic style, yeah. So many young generation in Indonesia have a very wide canvas, yeah, of style from Japanese comics. Yeah. You can see a realism manga style, gitu ya, or the very cartoonish and silly cartoon from Japanese manga style, like for example the Crayon Shinchan, right? Yeah. You can see a very specific girl comics, from
Mama-chan or something. I do have a lot of that.
Yeah.
We still have I still have 5 minutes if you want. I have ask questions perhaps, or maybe Mas Hendry want to share something. We do have 2 comic experts here. Thank you. Anyone? No, Mbak Kandi? Mbak Kandi.
Halo Mas Iga. Halo Mas Hikmat.
Halo.
Salam kenal.
Salam kenal juga.
Mbak Kandi in UK.
Oh,
wow. Saya terlambat tadi Jo. Ini sebenarnya saya bukan terlambat. Tadi saya malah datang duluan 20 menit sebelum acara.
Waduh.
Saking inginnya mendengar. Tapi kemudian saya harus lift cepat-cepat karena saya lagi di kereta dan ternyata sudah sampai tujuan lebih cepat. Jadi saya kaget kemudian lift. Dan sayangnya saya nggak bisa dengar lecturingnya ya fully. Jadi saya baru join dan hanya mendengar Mas Hikmat bicara 2 minutes actually, only 2 minutes.
It's okay. There will be a record ya.
Iya. Nanti saya akan dengarkan. Tapi saya mungkin tertarik karena ini mungkin keingintahuan saya sejak awal ya ketika saya dulu neliti komik ketika masih S1.
Yeah.
Dan saya masih sangat buta sebenarnya dengan metode visual culture dan sebagainya, itu malah belum saya pelajari ketika dulu saya memulai menganalisis. Cuman saya belajar sambil langsung mengerjakan lah istilahnya, sok-sokan agak gaya-gayaan gitu, memulai menganalisis sesuatu dengan pengetahuan yang sebenarnya masih sangat minim. Kalau sekarang saya mungkin tertarik untuk bertanya ke Mas Hikmat, terutama berkaitan dengan ini ya, bukan style mungkin, tapi unrealistic view. Itu kan mewarnai komik ya, karena segala sesuatu di komik itu kan sifatnya kan sangat imajiner, sangat berbeda dengan aktual reality yang kita hadapi. Ada begitu banyak hal-hal yang tidak terpikirkan dan tidak terbayangkan, tetapi itu bisa diwujudkan dalam sebuah dunia komik. Jadi pertanyaan saya, mungkin keingintahuan saya ketika masih meneliti sesuatu, dan masih keingintahuan saya, bagaimana ya Mas kita mendekatkan sesuatu yang begitu imajiner dalam dunia komik, kemudian kita bawa analisis kita untuk memahami dunia yang sebenarnya sangat very aktual, sangat aktual begitu kan. Ini kan dua dunia yang berbeda. Misalkan kita ngomong tentang identitas dan ideologi, persoalannya identitas yang kita temui di komik bisa jadi tidak relevan ketika kita gunakan itu untuk membaca identitas yang kita temui setiap harinya. Tetapi justru pertemuan dua dunia ini kan menarik ya, Mas. Itu kenapa kita sejak awal mungkin memilih komik karena sifatnya yang tidak terpikirkan itu di dalam komik ya, sehingga kemudian ini mungkin bisa berbicara sesuatu tentang dunia yang kita hidupi. Nah, saya ingin tahu bagaimana Mas Hikmat, mungkin saya tertarik untuk melihat atau menawarkan ya sebuah analisis yang membawa sebuah cara pandang, sebuah representasi yang sangat tidak realistis di komik, tetapi kemudian itu masih relevan untuk kita bawa dalam realitas yang sangat realistis ini.
Iya.
Iya, Mas, terima kasih. Maaf kalau suara saya berisik, masih di bis.
Wah, semangat ini. Wah, di mana tadi?
Di UK, di
London.
Di London, waduh. Ini saya sama Vivi kangen ini sama London nih.
Tapi lagi di Manchester.
Wah, lagi di Manchester ya. Kalau enggak tadi saya mau nitip komik, Jo.
Boleh saya carikan.
Toko komiknya, kangen saya di sana.
Yang di mana, Mas?
Ada di apa sih?
Dekat ini ya, Tottenham Court ya?
Ada. Iya ya, ada juga di situ.
Iya, betul.
Ada beberapa lah.
Iya.
So, Class and Mr. Satria, would you excuse me if I answer this in bahasa Indonesia? I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Because it's a very interesting question, and I feel like I could answer more fluidly and fluently in bahasa.
That's okay.
So sorry. Oke. Soal realisme di dalam komik itu sebetulnya kita lihat dalam sejarahnya, Mbak, ada perkembangan yang cukup kuat mengenai problem realisme di dalam komik, dalam artian komik sendiri kemudian menumbuhkan genre-genre yang berhasrat besar menampilkan realisme sedekat mungkin. Itu yang mungkin kita bisa lihat dalam tradisi graphic novel. Misalnya graphic novel yang tidak lagi ingin menuliskan cerita berdasarkan pakem-pakem genre yang sudah mapan, misalnya superhero atau apa. Bahkan di superhero juga ada ya masuk realisme, upaya untuk mendekatkan dengan kenyataan manusia yang pembuat atau pembacanya pada saat dibuat gitu. Tapi tradisi graphic novel itu sekarang banyak sekali yang menarik. Salah satu pelopornya mungkin Art Spiegelman, dan jadi Art Spiegelman itu menarik. Dia menggunakan teknik kartun, tetapi pada sama teknik kartun itu ditempatkan sebagai apa yang kalau dalam sastra itu disebut sebagai defamiliarisasi gitu, agar kita bisa melihatnya sebagai sebuah kenyataan diambil menjadi sebuah karya sastra fiksi itu dengan metode defamiliarisasi. Ini teori lama ya, dalam kritik sastra itu lama, dari Rusia. Nah, metode defamiliarisasi di dalam komik atau visual art gitu, itu adalah antara lain dengan teknik cartooning gitu ya. Nah, Art Spiegelman dia pengen serealis mungkin menampilkan kenyataan penyintas atau korban camp Yahudi semasa Perang Dunia Kedua, yaitu orang tuanya. Tapi cara dia adalah dengan menggunakan teknik kartun dan gambar yang tidak sembarangan, yang menempatkan secara simbolik agar jelas pesannya gitu ya. Kalau Nazi kucing, kalau para Yahudi itu tikus, makanya kan ininya mouse gitu ya. Nah, ada satu kejadian yang menarik dalam konteks pertanyaan Mbak Dina tadi. Satu kali dia kasih halaman komiknya kepada editornya. Lalu si editornya itu membaca dan tenggelam pada sebuah detail gambar. Tanpa banyak cincong, si Art Spiegelman mengambil gambar itu dan merobeknya. Dia bilang saya tidak ingin gambarnya menghalangi dari cerita. Jadi dia sengaja menggunakan teknik gambar yang kasar, kartun yang kasar, agar kita tidak tersedot perhatian secara penuh pada artnya. Dia pengen pada the ideas of the tragedy of the Holocaust gitu. Jadi begitu si gambar itu lebih menarik daripada cerita orang tuanya, dia robek gambar itu, dia gambar supaya gambarnya tidak menarik perhatian terlalu besar, mengalihkan dari ceritanya. Itu adalah sebuah pendekatan hibrid yang menarik antara teknik kartun sebagai wahana untuk menyampaikan kenyataan, kan. Jadi sebenarnya problem bagaimana menampilkan kenyataan di dalam medium seni itu juga sangat menarik terjadi dinamikanya dalam film, tapi itu nanti kita kapan-kapan kita bisa diskusi sebagai perbandingan dengan komik. Tapi dalam komik, teknik kartun pun yang tadinya hanya berbasis stereotip dan penyederhanaan dan pelebih-lebihan gitu ya, itu bisa dibetot menjadi sebuah wahana untuk menyampaikan kenyataan sesungguhnya. Ada beberapa contoh dalam graphic novel, misalnya Stuck Rubber Baby dari Howard Cruz, dan kartun-kartun dia tentang kehidupan gay di Amerika gitu ya. Lalu ada macam-macam. Bahkan kemudian orang masuk kepada komik genre fantastik macam superhero untuk memasukkan kenyataan itu gitu. Jadi jalur graphic novel untuk menampilkan kenyataan, slice of life dan sebagainya, atau historical graphic novel gitu ya, menjadi alur tersendiri yang jadi industri tersendiri. Nah itu di toko-toko komik yang saya kangeni di London itu banyak sekali yang saya tadinya cuma baca di internet gitu. Wah, saya sentuh bukunya gitu kan, gemes gitu dan mahal. Jadi nggak bisa dikonsumsi semua, nggak bisa saya bawa semua gitu ya. Tapi itu jadi alur industri sendiri dan jadi alur diskursif sendiri, di mana realisme betul-betul diwujudkan dalam bentuk gambar yang realis atau yang sadar tentang realismenya gitu, atau sadar limitasi representasinya, dan kemudian tetap mengatasi batasan-batasan representasi itu. Tapi di sisi lain, komik-komik yang fantastik itu juga kemudian catch up dengan problem of realism ini, problem untuk menampilkan atau merepresentasikan kenyataan dalam dunia nyata. Misalnya contoh yang paling unik itu pada saat di Amerika sedang rame-ramenya, kalau di Indonesia kan yang rame-rame kemarin kan Jokowi versus Prabowo ya. Kalau di Amerika waktu itu adalah Al Gore versus George Bush. Nah, pada saat itu komik Superman menampilkan lini cerita di mana Lex Luthor jadi presiden. Lex Luthor jadi presiden. Jadi dari situ sejak lini cerita Lex Luthor jadi presiden, ada banyak kemungkinan bagi para komikus superhero di Amerika untuk masuk ke isu-isu sosial yang nyata gitu. Masuk ke isu-isu sosial. Tidak semuanya berhasil. Tapi banyak sekali dengan pendekatan metaforik gitu ya. Jadi dengan secara superhero jadi metafora isu realistik di dalam masyarakat Amerika saat itu. Jadi itulah kenapa kita bisa lihat misalnya ada tadi komik tentang gay marriage, karena kan metafor dari cultural war seputar kehidupan LGBTQ di Amerika. Kita bisa melihat isu gun control, kita bisa melihat isu misalnya Miss Marvel yang sekarang tokohnya adalah Kamala, seorang remaja keturunan imigran Pakistan yang kakaknya adalah seorang anak pengajian, anak musola gitu. Gitu kan. Jadi ada banyak sekali isu sosial yang kemudian masuk ke dalam komik fantasi pun. Tapi caranya adalah dengan metafor. Gambarnya kemudian menyesuaikan diri, ada yang dengan tetap gaya kartun dalam konteks melakukan defamiliarisasi. Gunanya defamiliarisasi kan antara lain adalah memberi jarak kepada kenyataan sehari-hari yang luput menjadi memiliki signifikansi pemaknaan gitu. Dengan cara-cara misalnya kalau di dalam sastra kan penerapan majas dan sebagainya. Kalau buat peneliti, kita bisa meneliti bagaimana bahasa visualnya itu, gramatikal visualnya itu menuju fungsi itu, merepresentasikan kenyataan. Saya jadinya begitu. Saya mencoba mempelajari, membreakdown komik yang saya baca bukan ceritanya aja. Yang kita tahu misalnya ceritanya representing something, tapi bahkan yang tidak representing secara nyata kenyataan gitu ya. Bisa saya baca sebagai mewakili kenyataan dalam konteks mengenali elemen-elemen visualnya. Bagaimana garisnya, bagaimana elemen figuratifnya gitu, bagaimana color palette-nya dan sebagainya. Dari situ saya menerapkan sebuah metode pembacaan untuk mengenali unsur visual mana yang menjadi wahana untuk menampilkan kenyataan di luar komiknya. Itu sih sedikit dari saya. Maksudnya ini sih pertanyaan yang butuh diskusi lebih panjang sih, Mbak Dina ya.
Kita perlu nanti bikin event tambahan khusus buat dosen-dosen komunikasi. Thank you, Mas Imad. Yes, we do have one more question from Mas Hendri ini.
Oh ya.
There have a different style comic wayang between Pak Kosasih and Pak Ardi Soma. What is the difference?
Iya, wah panjang lagi. Jadi kalau secara sederhana sih yang saya baca ya, Koko ya. Again, I must apologize with my bahasa Indonesia. I answer more fluently in bahasa Indonesia. I'm sorry. Kalau singkatnya sih kalau Pak Kosasih, kalau Ardi Soma itu lebih impresionistik ya. Jadi dia itu bukan garis-garis yang tegas, tapi garis-garis yang sugestif untuk memberikan bentuk gitu, kesan bentuk gitu. Dan akhirnya kita bisa mendapatkan sebuah sebuah lanskap 3 dimensi yang lebih lebih sugestif ya ketimbang kartunis gitu. Nah kalau Pak Kosasih itu lebih kartuni, dia lebih tradisinya itu kartun, garisnya tuh nyambung tegas gitu kan, jelas gitu kan. Tapi garis itu untuk membangun sebuah sosok, membangun sekian sosok dan latar tempat yang sudah disederhanakan sebagaimana dalam pakem kartun gitu. Jadi tradisinya kalau Pak Kosasih itu kalau dari segi gambar itu. Kalau di luar style gambar tentu ada style tuturan ya, style tuturan. Dua-duanya berdasarkan riset, tetapi riset kostum bangunan itu kayaknya lebih banyak dilakukan oleh Ardi Soma, Pak Ardi Soma. Jadi arsitekturnya itu kuat, bagus sekali gitu ya. Kalau di Ardi Soma gitu. Kalau di era Kosasih dia lebih mengandalkan pada plot gitu, pada dialog gitu ya. Jadi dia tradisinya tuh lebih tradisi teater ketimbang seni rupa gitu. Kalau dalam hal menyusun ceritanya. Kalau kira-kira saya begitu sih, Koko. Ini juga lagi-lagi butuh seminar nih, era Kosasih dan Ardi Soma. Tapi udah agak advance kalau ini pertanyaannya, udah advance.
Nanti saya mau udah jadi sponsor acaranya, nanti saya bikin.
Atau kerjasama sama sahabat Seni Nusantara, nanti kita ngobrol deh.
Siap. Mbak Dina, we still have one question, very last question, because at 6 we need to end the class. I have another class at 6, so. Mbak Dina, please.
Sorry, aku ngomongnya dalam bahasa Indonesia juga ya.
Iya, silakan.
Enggak, karena dalam temuanku tentang tesis itu aku menemukan bahwa melalui tokoh-tokohnya itu Disney itu lalu kemudian melakukan semacam menafikan realitas gitu ya. Jadi kan kalau di dalam cerita-cerita yang aku bahas itu tentang alien lalu UFO gitu ya. Jadi itu kan Disney itu selalu kayak butuh musuh baru, Amerika tuh butuh, representasi Amerika selalu butuh musuh baru gitu ya. Nah kemudian ini mereka tuh selalu menyelesaikan dengan dialog, dengan acara damai. Itu menurut aku sungguh berbeda gitu ya dengan semua invasi militer Amerika yang penuh dengan kekerasan gitu.
Betul.
Iya, dan kemudian juga munculnya ketika dia muncul dalam bentuk komik yang dalam mode produksinya kapitalistik, industri media. Betul. Itu akan akan memarginalkan pengetahuan alternatif yang melalui komik yang oplahnya tidak sebesar Disney. Itu salah satu temuan saya begitu gitu loh. Waktu bikin
teman-teman menarik, Mbak. Benar deh, kita mesti diskusi secara khusus soal ini. Saya belum memerhatikan persoalan alien dan UFO dan musuh baru, tapi saya kira yang perlu diperhatikan satu, jelas di samping moda kapitalisme ada semacam kemapanan nilai, nilai mapan yang dijadikan ideologinya gitu ya, ideologi kelas menengah Amerika.
Betul.
Tapi di sisi lain, dalam perkembangan terakhir itu banyak sekali cerita Disney itu diproduksi justru oleh seniman dari Italia. Nah ini mungkin perlu diteliti lebih jauh mana yang produk Amerika asli dan dari periode kapan gitu, juga dengan yang sekarang ini yang dominan bukan dari Amerika gitu, yang banyak masuk ke Indonesia.
Iya, jadi begini Mas Hikmat. Jadi kalau di Disney Company itu kalau orang yang mau nulis tentang Disney Comics itu lalu ada semacam kayak pelatihan khusus. Jadi dan mereka tuh nggak boleh berubah karakternya. Jadi semacam ada kayak kalau kita itu P4 itu loh. Nah, semacam itu.
Menarik
gitu
juga. Ya. P4 ya, betul juga.
Ya, jadi semacam itu dan mereka tuh betul-betul digodok supaya karakternya itu tidak, misalnya kalau orang Jawa Timur tidak melengse gitu loh. Karakternya itu harus tepat gitu. Jadi ideologi dominan Amerika tentang angkasa luar itu dimanapun komik Disney diproduksi itu akan selalu sama gitu loh. Ide-idenya, cara berpikirnya itu ada bukunya juga sih yang menjelaskan tentang bagaimana ide-ide komik itu Disney itu muncul. Eric Smudin kalau nggak salah di bukunya Eric Smudin tuh begitu gitu. Jadi betul-betul yang dikekep gitu loh
Berarti bisa dikatakan bahwa moda produksi yang global itu juga bisa dipandang sebagai salah satu wahana untuk ekspor ideologi kan dari Disney.
Betul.
Itu menarik sih kalau bisa didalami.
Cuman kalau misalnya itu kita memahaminya sama dengan Dorfman dan Matelat yang How to Read Donald Duck itu, sebetulnya itu nggak sepenuhnya betul gitu karena teks itu baru bermakna kalau dia dibaca kan, sementara kan perbedaan budaya itu kan juga bisa menyebabkan cara pandang yang berbeda gitu. Nah kalau Dorfman dan Matelat kan melihatnya itu kayak semacam kalau teori komunikasi itu teori yang jarum suntik gitu.
Bullet teori.
Iya, bullet teori.
Jadi langsung menjadi satu yang yang ideologis
dan kemudian itu kan tahun berapa ya? Gitu. Tahun berapa ya ditulisnya. Jadi kayak masih sederhana sekali memahami kompleksitas dinamika kapitalisme dalam produksi
betul.
Ini komik
walaupun
ini.
Benar.
Mbak Dina, mohon maaf saya
harus
potong Mbak Dina. Sudah waktunya untuk diakhiri discussion.
Nanti kita ngobrol lagi ya Mas Dina.
Terima kasih ya.
So, Mas Isman, thank you for coming to this class and thank you for student. Jason, I will send the file to our class group. And Mas Isman, tolong tadi yang Jason minta tabel-tabel komparasi itu bisa dikirim ke kami mungkin.
Right, okay. WhatsApp ya.
WhatsApp.
I will send to you and Evira ya.
Okay. Yep. So, thank you everyone for coming. Selamat malam. Have a good night. Thank you, Mas Ismat. Stay safe, stay healthy, stay happy.
Makasih Mas Satria.
Makasih Mas Indri.
Makasih
Mas.
Ya Mas. Lama nggak ketemu ya.
Makasih pamit semua. Makasih Mas Hikmat.
Bye.
Makasih Mas Iga.
Thank you.